I never thought my own brother would destroy me over a printer cartridge. 28 years of sharing bedrooms, birthday cakes, and childhood dreams, and there I was, standing in the supply closet of Nexus Digital Solutions at 7:23 a.m., holding an empty toner box, while my brother Damien screamed at me like I was a stranger he'd caught stealing from his desk. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. This is exactly what I'm talking about, Zara. His voice echoed off the metal shelving, sharp enough to cut glass. You can't even manage basic office supplies without screwing it up? How am I supposed to trust you with real responsibilities? Not a question about what happened, not concern that our biggest client presentation was in 3 hours and we had no way to print the contracts. Just pure, concentrated disappointment wrapped in designer cologne and a $400 tie that I knew came out of company funds because I'd seen the receipt. The same company funds that technically belonged more to me than to him, though he had no idea. But I'm getting ahead of myself. As I stood there, clutching that empty cartridge like evidence of my own inadequacy, watching my younger brother, my baby brother, the one I used to read bedtime stories to, tear me apart in front of the entire morning staff, I realized this wasn't about toner at all. This was about power, about respect, about the careful fiction we'd built over the past 5 years that this was our company, when in his mind, it had always been his. The breaking point wasn't the screaming. I'd survived plenty of that. It wasn't even the humiliation of being dressed down in front of employees I personally hired and trained. What broke me was the look in his eyes. Cold, calculating, like he was already imagining what the company would look like without me in it. He had no idea that by Monday morning, those calculations would flip his entire world upside down. But let me pause here for just a second to check in with you, because this story is about to take some turns that even I didn't see coming. How's your day going so far? Are you dealing with family drama in your own life? Maybe workplace conflict that hits a little too close to home? I'd love to hear where you're watching from. Drop it in the comments. And if you've ever felt underestimated by someone who should have had your back, this story is definitely for you. A quick tap on that subscribe button helps more than you know, and trust me, you're going to want to see how this ends. Because that moment in the supply closet, that public humiliation over a $20 printer cartridge, was about to become the most expensive mistake my brother ever made, and the most liberating moment of my entire life. Let me take you back to how we got here, to a cluttered garage in Riverside Heights where 2 kids with big dreams and no money built something neither of us thought would survive the first year, let alone turn into the $50 million company that Damien now believed was his personal empire. It was 2019. I was 26, fresh out of a disastrous marriage that left me sleeping on my childhood bedroom floor, staring at glow-in-the-dark stars I'd put up when I was 12. Damien was 24, 2 years out of college with a business degree he'd never actually used, and a head full of ideas about digital marketing that made him sound brilliant at dinner parties, but fell apart the moment you asked for specifics. We were both broke. I was working double shifts at a call center in downtown Melbrook, taking abuse from strangers for $12 an hour, while he bounced between part-time gigs and elaborate schemes to become the next tech billionaire. Our parents had given up on both of us, which hurt more than I wanted to admit, but also freed us to take the kind of risks that responsible adults would never consider. The garage belonged to our childhood friend, Riley Patterson, whose family had moved to Florida but kept the house as a rental property. The tenants had moved out, leaving behind paint cans, broken furniture, and a musty smell that we somehow convinced ourselves was entrepreneurial atmosphere. For $200 a month, we had our headquarters. Those early days blur together in my memory like a fever dream. 18-hour workdays fueled by gas station coffee and pure stubbornness. Damien handled the client calls with the kind of smooth confidence that made people believe we were a legitimate agency instead of two desperate siblings with laptops and dreams. I built the systems, managed the projects, and somehow kept us from falling apart when our biggest client in month 2 demanded a full refund because we'd promised results we had no idea how to deliver. I was the one who figured out the automated reporting system that would eventually become our signature service. I was the one who worked until 3 a.m. for 6 straight months, teaching myself coding languages and marketing analytics that business schools charge $100,000 to explain poorly. I was the one who sacrificed my social life, my health, and what was left of my self-esteem to build something that could support both of us. But Damien was the face, the smooth talker, the one who could walk into a boardroom and convince middle-aged executives that 2 kids from Riverside Heights could revolutionize their digital presence. And honestly, that partnership worked beautifully for a while. We were family. We were partners. We were building something together. At least that's what I thought until that Monday morning when everything I believed about trust, family, and loyalty got shredded along with my employment contract. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. But before I dive deeper into how my brother went from partner to predator, let me take a moment to really connect with you because I have a feeling some of you might be going through something similar right now. How many of you are watching this while dealing with family members who take credit for your work? Maybe it's not a business partnership, maybe it's a family event you planned that your sibling gets praised for, or a project at work where your manager presents your ideas as their own. Drop a comment and let me know what's happening in your world. I read every single one, and honestly, your stories keep me motivated to share mine. And here's something I'm genuinely curious about. Where are you watching from today? Are you in your car during lunch break, sneaking a few minutes of inspiration between meetings? Maybe you're at home on a Sunday morning drinking coffee and trying to figure out your next move. Or perhaps you're like I was 5 years ago, lying awake at 2 a.m. wondering if the people closest to you actually have your back. Let me know in the comments. I love seeing how far this community reaches. If you're new here, welcome to a place where we talk about the real stories behind success, the messy family dynamics, the betrayals that teach us who we really are, and the moments when we discover we're stronger than anyone ever believed. This isn't just another business channel. This is about the human side of ambition, the relationships that make or break us, and the shocking ways that power can corrupt even the people who should love us most. And if you're enjoying this story so far, here's how you can help me reach more people who need to hear it. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and give this video a thumbs up. I know everyone says this, but it genuinely makes a difference. YouTube's algorithm is mysterious and sometimes cruel, kind of like family dynamics. But when you engage with these videos, it helps them reach other people who might be facing their own Damien situation. Here's what I promise you. By the end of the story, you're going to understand something powerful about hidden strength, about the weapons we carry without even knowing it, and about how sometimes the people who underestimate us the most are the ones who hand us the keys to their own downfall. You'll also learn exactly how a 28-year-old woman with no business degree and a head full of self-doubt managed to checkmate her Harvard MBA brother in a game he didn't even know they were playing. But most importantly, you're going to see that you have more power than you think. Even when you're standing in a supply closet getting screamed at by someone half your experience and twice your arrogance, you might be holding cards they don't even know exist. So stick with me through this story, share it with someone who needs to remember their worth, and let's get back to that garage in Riverside Heights, because that's where the seeds of Monday's revolution were actually planted. In decisions I made when I still believed that family meant something more than market share. The smell of sawdust and old motor oil in Riley's garage takes me back to a time when Damien and I actually liked each other. Back when we were just 2 broke kids who shared the same impossible dream and had absolutely no idea what we were doing.
I need you to understand something about our family dynamic because it explains everything that happened later. Damien had always been the golden child. Not because he was smarter or more talented, but because he had this magnetic confidence that made adults believe he was destined for greatness. Teachers loved him, coaches praised him, our parents bragged about him at neighborhood barbecues, while I stood there invisible, holding their drinks and nodding along. I was the responsible one, the one who got straight A's without fanfare, who worked part-time jobs to pay for my own school supplies, who cleaned up his messes and covered for his mistakes. When Damien got suspended for spray painting the gym, I was the one who stayed after school for 2 weeks helping the janitor scrub it off. When he crashed Dad's car into a mailbox, I lent him my savings to pay for the repairs so he wouldn't get in trouble. That pattern followed us into adulthood. I was always the safety net, the problem solver, the one who made things work while he got the credit for making things happen. But in that garage, for the first time in our lives, we needed each other equally. Or at least I thought we did.
Those first 6 months were brutal in ways I'm not sure I can properly explain. We were living on ramen noodles and shared data plans, taking meetings with potential clients while sitting on paint buckets because we couldn't afford real chairs. I had taught myself basic web design using free YouTube tutorials, staying up until sunrise practicing HTML and CSS on a laptop that crashed every time I tried to run more than 3 programs at once. Damien, meanwhile, was networking with the kind of relentless energy that both impressed and exhausted me. He'd show up to business meetups at coffee shops in Millbrook wearing the same 3 polo shirts in rotation, armed with business cards we'd printed at the local library, and a pitch that somehow made our non-existent company sound like the next Google. The breakthrough came in October. Damien had been pursuing this local restaurant chain called Pepper and Sage for weeks, calling their marketing director every few days with new ideas for improving their online presence. Finally, she agreed to meet with us, not because she was particularly impressed, but because Damien's persistence had worn her down. Her name was Dr. Natasha Brooks, and she was everything I wasn't. Polished, confident, wearing a blazer that probably cost more than our monthly rent. She walked into our garage office, looked around at our makeshift setup with barely concealed amusement, and gave us exactly 1 hour to prove we deserved her business. Damien launched into his prepared presentation about brand synergy and digital ecosystem optimization, words he'd memorized from marketing blogs but didn't really understand. I watched Dr. Brooks's expression grow more skeptical with each buzzword. 20 minutes in, I could see we were losing her. That's when I did something that changed everything. I interrupted my own brother. "Can I show you something?" I asked, pulling up a dashboard I had been working on for weeks. It was rough around the edges, built with free tools and held together with determination, but it tracked customer engagement across multiple platforms in real time. More importantly, it translated all those metrics into actual business insights that a restaurant owner could use. "This is what your customers are really doing," I explained, walking her through the data visualization I'd created. "They're not just clicking your ads randomly. There's a pattern here. They research your menu online during lunch hours, but they make reservations during evening commute times. If we adjust your social media posting schedule and optimize your website for mobile ordering, we could increase your conversion rate by at least 30%. Dr. Brooks leaned forward. For the first time since she'd arrived, she looked genuinely interested. "You built this yourself?" I nodded, feeling heat rise in my cheeks. "It's not perfect, but it's brilliant," she interrupted. "This is exactly what we need." We walked out of that meeting with our first real contract, $5,000 a month for 6 months, with the possibility of renewal. More money than either of us had ever seen at once. But here's what happened next. And this is where you start to see the cracks that would eventually split everything apart. As we celebrated that night with gas station champagne and pizza we could finally afford, Damien started talking about our presentation and our system. Not my dashboard that had sealed the deal, but our collective brilliance. I didn't correct him. I told myself it didn't matter who got credit as long as we were moving forward together. That was my first mistake. Over the next 18 months, that pattern repeated itself dozens of times. I would create the systems, solve the technical problems, and figure out how to deliver on Damien's promises. He would charm the clients, negotiate the contracts, and somehow always end up being the one who got thanked at the end of successful projects. By the time we moved out of the garage and into our first real office space, a cramped suite above a yoga studio in downtown Millbrook, we had 12 employees and annual revenue approaching 7 figures. I was working 16-hour days, managing operations, training new hires, and constantly putting out fires that threatened to derail our growth. Damien was working too, don't misunderstand me, but his work was visible. Presentations to clients, networking events, industry conferences where he represented our company. My work was invisible. The infrastructure that kept everything running, the systems that turned his big ideas into actual results, the late-night problem-solving that prevented small issues from becoming company-ending disasters. And slowly, so gradually that I didn't notice it happening, the narrative began to shift. Clients started referring to Nexus Digital Solutions as Damien's company. Industry articles mentioned him as the founder and visionary, while I was relegated to supporting cast, if I was mentioned at all. I told myself it was temporary, that once we were more established, once the pressure eased, we'd rebalance things. I told myself that family meant something, that partnerships were built on trust, and that my contributions would eventually be recognized. I had no idea that while I was building his empire, he was already planning to erase me from it entirely. The signs were there. I just didn't want to see them.
The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning in March 2021, buried between electric bills and promotional flyers from local restaurants. I almost threw it away without opening it. The return address was from some law firm in downtown Millbrook that I'd never heard of, and the envelope had that cheap bulk mail feel that screamed class action lawsuit advertisement. But something made me pause. Maybe it was the way my name was spelled correctly in the address label, or the fact that it was addressed specifically to me, not to current resident, like most junk mail. I tore it open while standing over the trash can in my tiny apartment kitchen, expecting to find another lawyer promising to help me sue someone I'd never met over damages I'd never experienced. Instead, I found something that would change my life completely, though I had no idea at the time. The letter was from Hendricks, Walsh & Associates, representing the estate of Margaret Chen, a name I recognized immediately. She had been our angel investor, the sharp-eyed venture capitalist who had taken a chance on 2 kids with big dreams and bigger appetites back when we were still operating out of that garage. She'd invested $200,000 in our company in early 2020, money that had allowed us to hire our first real employees and move into legitimate office space. What I didn't know, what nobody had told me, was that Margaret Chen had died 6 months earlier from complications following surgery, and apparently she had left me something in her will. The letter was formal, written in that particular brand of legal language that makes everything sound both incredibly important and completely incomprehensible. But buried in the 3rd paragraph was a sentence that made my coffee cup freeze halfway to my lips. Ms. Hayes, please be advised that you are named as beneficiary of Mrs. Chen's shares in Nexus Digital Solutions, totaling 26% equity stake in the company, as well as her proxy rights for an additional 25% stake currently held in trust. I read that sentence 4 times before the numbers started to make sense. Margaret Chen hadn't just been an investor, she had been a major shareholder. And for reasons I couldn't fathom, she had left her entire stake to me. The letter continued with details about probate procedures and legal requirements, but my brain had stopped processing information. I sat down at my kitchen table, the wobbly one I'd bought secondhand 3 years earlier, and tried to do math that suddenly felt impossible. When we'd incorporated Nexus Digital Solutions, Damien and I had each taken a 37% stake in the company, leaving 26% available for outside investment. That had seemed fair at the time, and honestly, percentages were just numbers on paper when the company was worth nothing. Margaret Chen's $200,000 had bought her that 26% stake, with the understanding that she'd also hold proxy voting rights for our parents, who had each received a symbolic 12.5% share as a thank you gesture that we'd never expected to matter. But now Margaret was gone, and apparently she had decided that her shares should go to me.
Not to Damien, the smooth-talking CEO who had pitched her on our company's potential, not to both of us equally, to me, specifically. The implications hit me like cold water. My original 37%, plus Margaret's 26%, plus the proxy rights for our parents' combined 25%, meant that I controlled 51% of Nexus Digital Solutions. I wasn't just a co-founder anymore. I was the majority shareholder. I was, in legal terms that I barely understood but couldn't ignore, the owner of my brother's company. The letter included a phone number for Margaret's attorney, a woman named Patricia Hendricks, who wanted to schedule a meeting to discuss the transfer of assets and explain my new responsibilities as a shareholder. But I couldn't bring myself to make that call. Not yet. Instead, I did what I always did when faced with information I didn't understand. I researched. I spent the next 3 days reading everything I could find about corporate governance, shareholder rights, and voting procedures. I learned about majority control and fiduciary duties, and the surprisingly complex world of corporate ownership structures. What I discovered was both thrilling and terrifying. As the majority shareholder, I had the legal authority to make decisions about the direction of the company, including hiring and firing decisions for executive positions. I could call shareholder meetings, demand financial records, and essentially overrule any decision made by the board of directors, which in our small company basically meant overruling Damien. But here's the thing about power that nobody tells you. It's only as strong as your willingness to use it. And I had no idea how to use it, or even if I wanted to. I kept the letter in my desk drawer, hidden under insurance documents and old tax returns. Every few days, I'd take it out and read it again, as if the words might change or the legal implications might become more clear. But they never did. Meanwhile, life at Nexus Digital Solutions continued exactly as it had before. Damien ran staff meetings with his usual charismatic authority. I managed projects and solved technical problems and stayed late to fix whatever crisis had emerged that day. Our employees looked to him for vision and leadership, and to me for the practical details that kept that vision functioning. None of them knew that the quiet woman who ordered office supplies and troubleshoot software issues actually owned the company they worked for. Hell, I barely knew it.
The attorney, Patricia Hendricks, called me twice. Both times I let it go to voicemail. Both times she left polite but increasingly urgent messages about paperwork that needed to be signed and legal procedures that couldn't be delayed indefinitely. I told myself I was too busy to deal with legal complications. We were in the middle of our biggest growth period ever, landing new clients and expanding into services I'd never imagined when we started. There was always another fire to put out, another system to fix, another crisis that required my immediate attention. But the truth was simpler and more complicated. I was scared. Scared of what this knowledge might do to my relationship with Damien. Scared of the responsibility that came with majority ownership. Scared that if I acknowledged this power, I'd be forced to use it in ways that might destroy everything we'd built together. So I buried the letter deeper in my desk drawer and pretended it didn't exist. I went to work every day and took orders from my younger brother and accepted my role as the invisible engine that powered his visible success. For 8 months, that strategy worked perfectly. The letter stayed hidden, the power remained unused, and life continued with its familiar rhythm of his recognition and my anonymity. Right up until the morning when everything fell apart, and I realized that some weapons find their way into your hands whether you're looking for them or not. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It was gradual, like watching someone you love develop a disease. First, just small symptoms you could ignore, then undeniable changes that forced you to confront an ugly new reality. It started with the new office. In September 2022, Damien announced we were moving Nexus Digital Solutions to a gleaming high-rise in downtown Millbrook's business district. 23rd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows, a reception area that looked like it belonged in a tech startup movie. The lease was $18,000 a month, more than we'd spent on rent in our entire first year combined. "We need to look successful to be successful," he explained to the staff during our relocation meeting, gesturing toward architectural renderings that showed glass conference rooms and an open-concept workspace designed by some hotshot firm from Seattle. Clients want to work with winners, not garage startups. I raised my hand tentatively. Damien, the numbers don't really support this kind of overhead increase right now. We'd need to land at least 3 more major accounts just to break even on. Zara, he interrupted, not even looking at me. Can you handle the logistics of the move? I need someone reliable to coordinate with the movers and IT setup. That's more your speed anyway. The room went quiet. 26 employees watching my brother dismiss me like I was his assistant, not his co-founder, not his equal partner who had built the systems that generated the revenue paying for his architectural fantasies. I swallowed the humiliation and nodded, because that's what I did. That's what I'd always done. The new office came with new expenses that made my spreadsheet-obsessed heart race. A full-time receptionist named Chloe, whose primary qualifications seemed to be her ability to make Damien laugh at meetings. A creative consultant who charged us $8,000 to redesign our logo into something that looked exactly like our old logo, but in a slightly different shade of blue. Catered lunches every Friday that nobody had requested, but everyone felt obligated to attend. But the biggest change wasn't financial, it was cultural. Suddenly, there were rules about maintaining our professional image and appropriate workplace attire. Suddenly, my comfortable jeans and blazer combinations weren't suitable for client meetings. Suddenly, I needed to elevate my presentation if I wanted to be taken seriously. The irony was suffocating. I was the one who had built the technical infrastructure that our clients actually paid for. I was the one who trained every new hire on our processes and procedures. I was the one who stayed late when servers crashed and came in early when deadlines loomed. But apparently, I wasn't professional enough to represent the company I'd created. Damien, meanwhile, had embraced his role as CEO with the enthusiasm of someone who had been waiting his whole life for a stage big enough to match his ego. He started wearing suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He hired a personal assistant, not for the company, for himself, to manage his calendar and book his travel to industry conferences where he gave presentations about scaling digital solutions in competitive markets. Those presentations killed me. I'd watch him on live streams sometimes, talking about innovation and strategic vision and the importance of building robust technical systems, using my language, describing my work, explaining concepts I'd taught him during late-night troubleshooting sessions. But somehow in his version of our story, he was the technical genius. And I was what? The administrator who kept the office running?
When the article came out 6 weeks later, it was titled The Visionary Behind Nexus Digital, How Damien Hayes Built a 7-Figure Empire. 7,000 words about entrepreneurial brilliance and strategic leadership. My name appeared exactly twice. Once as Damien's sister and operations manager, and once in a caption describing me as part of the dedicated support team that helps execute Hayes' innovative vision. Operations manager, support team. 28 years old, co-founder of a multi-million-dollar company, reduced to a footnote in someone else's success story. But the real betrayal wasn't the article. It was Damien's reaction to it. He had copies printed and framed for the office lobby. He shared it on every social media platform he could find, tagging industry leaders and potential clients. He submitted it to business award competitions as evidence of his entrepreneurial excellence. Not once did he mention that the journalist had gotten the story wrong. Not once did he correct the narrative or insist on proper credit for the work I'd done. He just basked in the recognition and let me fade further into the background. That's when the meetings started happening without me. Executive strategy sessions that somehow didn't require the person who managed all of our operations. Vision planning workshops that focused on the future direction of technology I'd built, but apparently wasn't qualified to discuss. I'd find out about major decisions through company-wide emails, like I was just another employee receiving updates about policies I'd had no input on. New service offerings that would require significant technical development, launched without consulting the person who'd have to build them.
Pricing changes that affected every client relationship, decided without input from the person who managed most of those relationships day to day. The morning I walked into the supply closet to find empty printer cartridges, I realized that my erasure was almost complete. I'd become the invisible woman who kept things running while someone else took credit for everything that mattered. The behind-the-scenes problem solver who could be blamed when things went wrong, but never praised when they went right. And my brother, my baby brother, who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, had orchestrated the whole thing with surgical precision. He'd systematically removed me from every decision, every recognition, every moment of visible success, until I was nothing more than a glorified office manager in the company I'd built. Standing there with that empty toner cartridge, listening to him scream at me like I was an incompetent stranger, I finally understood what had been happening. This wasn't about printer supplies or professional standards or appropriate workplace behavior. This was about erasing me completely. And he was almost finished. The email arrived at 4:47 p.m. on a Friday with the subject line, "Immediate action required, confidential." No greeting, no context, just a link to a calendar invitation for Monday morning at 8 a.m. Meeting location, conference room A. Attendees, Damien Hayes, Zara Hayes, Jennifer Walsh, HR director, and someone named Thomas Brennan, whose email signature identified him as Legal Counsel Corporate Transitions. Corporate transitions. My stomach dropped like an elevator with cut cables. I stared at that phrase for a long time, my cursor blinking accusingly in the reply field. Every instinct I'd developed over 5 years of running operations told me this wasn't a routine meeting. You don't schedule confidential sessions with legal counsel on Friday afternoons unless something fundamental is about to change. I spent the weekend in a state of controlled panic, running through scenarios in my head. Maybe Damien was finally ready to buy me out, a clean break that would let him have his empire while giving me enough money to start over somewhere else. Maybe he'd found a buyer for the whole company and wanted to discuss our exit strategy. Maybe this was about formalizing the organizational changes he'd been implementing gradually, making official what had already become reality. But deep down, in that place where your worst fears live, I knew exactly what Monday morning would bring. This was termination. This was Damien finally completing the erasure he'd been working on for months. I didn't sleep Sunday night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table, drinking coffee and staring at that letter from Patricia Hendricks, the one I'd been hiding in my desk drawer for almost 2 years. I'd read it so many times that I had memorized every legal phrase, every percentage, every implication of Margaret Chen's final gift to me. For the first time since I had received it, I actually called the number. Patricia answered on the second ring, despite it being nearly midnight. "Ms. Hayes," she said, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. "I was wondering when I'd finally hear from you." "I'm sorry I waited so long," I said, my voice smaller than I'd intended. I think I might need that paperwork now." "Are you in some kind of trouble?" I laughed, but it came out more like a sob. "My brother is firing me Monday morning from the company I built, from the company I apparently own." There was a long pause. Then Patricia's voice, sharp and professional. "Ms. Hayes, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Do not sign anything on Monday. Do not agree to anything. Do not make any verbal commitments or written statements. Can you do that?"
I think so. No, I need you to be certain. If what you're telling me is accurate, if your brother is attempting to remove you from a company where you hold majority control, then every word you speak in that meeting becomes evidence. Every signature becomes a legal commitment. Promise me you'll stay quiet and call me the moment it's over. I promised, though I had no idea how I'd keep my mouth shut while watching my own brother destroy my life. Monday morning came with the kind of gray drizzle that makes everything look like a funeral. I arrived at the office 15 minutes early, old habits die hard, and found the lobby deserted except for Chloe, our receptionist, who avoided eye contact when I walked past her desk. Conference room A was our largest meeting space, the one we used for presentations to major clients. Someone had arranged it like a tribunal.
Damien at the head of the table, Jennifer and Thomas Brennan flanking him on either side, and a single chair facing all three of them. My chair, obviously. On the table in front of that lonely chair was a manila folder, thick with documents. "Zara," Damien said as I walked in, not getting up, not smiling. "Thanks for coming. Please, sit down." Thanks for coming. To my own execution. I sat and folded my hands in my lap, remembering Patricia's voice. Stay quiet, don't sign anything. Thomas Brennan cleared his throat and opened what I assumed was his copy of the folder. "Ms. Hayes, I represent Nexus Digital Solutions in matters of corporate restructuring. What we're discussing today is a mutual separation agreement that we believe serves everyone's best interests." Mutual. The word tasted bitter, even though I hadn't spoken it. Jennifer leaned forward with that synthetic smile HR people practice in mirrors. "Zara, we all recognize the valuable contributions you've made over the years. This isn't about performance or capability. It's about organizational evolution and the need to streamline our leadership structure as we move into our next growth phase." Organizational evolution, streamline leadership structure, corporate doublespeak for, "we're throwing you overboard." Damien finally spoke, his tone carefully modulated to sound reasonable, even caring. "Sis, I know this is difficult, but we both know you've been unhappy with the direction the company has taken. This gives you a clean exit with a substantial severance package, plus equity liquidation at current market valuation." He slid the folder across the table. "Everything's in there. 12 months of salary, continuation of benefits, and a fair buyout of your founding shares at $2.3 million. It's generous, Zara, more than generous." I opened the folder with trembling fingers. The separation agreement was straightforward enough, standard termination language dressed up with legal flourishes. The severance terms were indeed substantial, probably more money than I'd ever seen in one place. But it was the second document that made my heart stop. A share purchase agreement, transferring my 37% founding stake back to the company for the promised $2.3 million. Clean and simple, and completely devastating. Except for one small problem that none of them knew about. I wasn't selling 37%. I was being asked to sell 51%. My fingers found the signature line, and I had a moment of pure crystalline clarity. This wasn't just about removing me from daily operations. This was about ownership. This was about control. This was about ensuring that I could never come back and challenge decisions or demand transparency or threaten the empire Damien had built on the foundation of my work. He needed me gone, completely and permanently, with no legal claim to anything we had created together. And he was willing to pay $2.3 million to make that happen. What he didn't realize was that $2.3 million was roughly $4.7 million less than my shares were actually worth. Margaret Chen's gift had made me the majority shareholder of a company that was now valued at over $15 million. He was trying to buy me out at a massive discount based on ownership percentages that were 2 years out of date. I closed the folder without signing anything. "This is a generous offer," I said quietly, "but I need time to review it with my attorney." Thomas Brennan's eyebrows shot up. "Your attorney?" "I'll need a few days to make sure I understand all the implications." The temperature in the room dropped about 20 degrees. Damien leaned back in his chair, his jaw tight. "Sis, this really is the best deal you're going to get. If you drag this out, if you make this complicated, it's not going to end well for anyone." "I understand," I said, standing up and tucking the folder under my arm. "I'll be in touch soon." I walked out of conference room A with my head high and my hands steady, leaving 3 people staring after me in confused frustration. In the elevator, I pulled out my phone and called Patricia Hendricks. "It's time," I said when she answered. "I need those papers. All of them. I'll have everything ready within the hour. Miss Hayes, I think you're about to discover just how much power you've been sitting on." As the elevator descended toward the lobby, I realized she was right. For 2 years, I'd been carrying a loaded weapon without knowing it. Now, finally, I was ready to take the safety off.
Patricia Hendricks' office occupied the corner of a converted warehouse in the Arts District of Millbrook, sandwiched between a pottery studio and a vintage bookstore.
The building had exposed brick walls and industrial lighting that probably looked trendy in magazine spreads, but made everything feel slightly cold and unforgiving. Perfect for what I was about to do. She was waiting for me with a conference table covered in documents arranged with military precision. Corporate filings, shareholder agreements, proxy statements, and in the center of it all, Margaret Chen's original will and the transfer documents I'd been too scared to sign for almost 2 years. "Before we begin," Patricia said, pouring coffee from a carafe that looked older than I was, "I need to understand exactly what you want to accomplish here. Are you looking to negotiate better terms for your exit, or are you planning to fight?" I thought about that question for a long moment, staring at the papers that represented the power I'd been ignoring. What's the difference? Negotiation assumes you're willing to leave eventually. Fighting means you're staying and making them deal with the consequences of their actions. One approach requires compromise. The other requires courage. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Courage. How long had it been since I'd done anything that required real courage? How long had I been taking the safe path, the quiet path, the path that kept everyone else comfortable while I disappeared? "What would fighting look like?" I asked. Patricia smiled for the first time since I'd walked in. "It would look like exercising the rights you've been carrying around in your desk drawer. It would mean accepting that you own this company and acting like it." She spread out an organizational chart that showed Nexus Digital Solutions' current corporate structure. Your brother has been operating under the assumption that he controls 37% of the company, you control 37%, and outside investors control the remaining 26%. What he doesn't know is that you now control 63% of the voting shares, your original stake, plus Margaret's bequest, plus the proxy rights for your parents' symbolic holdings. The numbers look different written out on paper, stark and undeniable. So, what does that mean practically? It means you can call a shareholder meeting at any time. It means you can vote to remove him as CEO. It means you can restructure the entire executive team, change the direction of the company, or block any major decisions he tries to make without your approval. She paused, studying my face. It also means you can fire him. Fire my own brother? The thought should have horrified me, but instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Possibility. "But there's a catch," Patricia continued, gathering the documents into neat stacks. "Once you use this power, there's no going back to the way things were. Your relationship with Damien will never recover. Your family will take sides. Some of your employees will see you as a hero, others as a villain. You'll be trading invisibility for visibility, and visibility comes with consequences." I nodded, understanding the weight of what she was telling me. "What do I need to do?" "Nothing." I must have looked confused because she laughed and leaned back in her chair. "That's the beauty of your position, Zara. You hold the power. That means you don't have to make the first move. You can sit back and let Damien escalate this situation while you gather intelligence and prepare your response." She was right. For the first time in our entire relationship, I didn't have to chase after Damien or try to fix his mistakes or clean up his messes. I could wait. I could watch. I could let him reveal exactly how far he was willing to go. "Here's what's going to happen," Patricia explained, gathering the documents into neat stacks. "When you don't sign their separation agreement by their artificial deadline, they're going to panic. They'll try pressure tactics, threats, guilt trips, maybe even involving your parents or other family members. They might attempt to change the locks on your office or restrict your access to company systems. Can they do that? They can try. But as the majority shareholder, you have the right to inspect all corporate records, attend all meetings, and access any company property. If they try to freeze you out physically, we can get a court order within 24 hours. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. I would return to work Tuesday morning as if nothing had happened. I would continue performing my duties, managing my projects, and solving the technical problems that kept Nexus Digital Solutions running. I would be professional, cooperative, and completely silent about the nuclear option I was carrying in my back pocket. And I would wait for Damien to reveal his true intentions. The key, she emphasized, is documentation. I need you to keep records of every interaction, every meeting, every attempt they make to pressure or intimidate you. Forward me every email, save every voicemail, take notes on every conversation. I spent the rest of Tuesday afternoon in Patricia's office signing the documents that officially transferred Margaret Chen's shares to me and established my legal standing as majority shareholder. Each signature felt like putting on armor, piece by piece, until I was protected by the kind of power I never imagined possessing. When I left her office that evening, I wasn't the same woman who had walked in 6 hours earlier. I wasn't the invisible problem solver who cleaned up messes and took orders and accepted blame for things that weren't her fault.
I was the owner of Nexus Digital Solutions, and I was about to find out exactly what my brother was willing to do to try to take that away from me. Wednesday morning, I arrived at the office at my usual time, carrying my laptop and my coffee and the quiet satisfaction of someone who finally understood the game she was playing. Chloe, the receptionist, looked surprised to see me. "Ooh," she said, fumbling with her headset. Zara, I thought you were—" "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," I said calmly. "Is Damien in yet?" He's in a meeting, an important meeting." I smiled. "That's fine. I have plenty to catch up on." I settled into my office, not the one they'd given me, but the one I'd chosen when we'd first moved into the building, and opened my laptop. 17 new emails had arrived overnight, most of them routine operational issues that needed my attention. But the 18th email made my pulse quicken. It was from Thomas Brennan, the lawyer who had been present at Monday's termination meeting. The subject line read, "Final Notice Separation Agreement." I opened it and found exactly what Patricia had predicted: escalation disguised as urgency, threats wrapped in legal language, and a new deadline that was somehow even more artificial than the first one. "Miss Hayes," the email began, "we are disappointed that you have chosen not to respond to our generous separation offer. Please be advised that this offer expires at 5 p.m. today, Wednesday, and will not be extended or renewed. Failure to accept these terms may result in alternative measures that will be significantly less favorable to your interests." Alternative measures. I forwarded the email to Patricia with a single word in the subject line: escalation. Her reply came back within minutes. "Perfect. Let them show their hand." So I waited. I answered emails, solved technical problems, and managed the systems that generated the revenue Damien was so eager to control exclusively. I was professional, efficient, and completely calm. At 5:01 p.m., my office phone rang. Damien's extension. Zara. His voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "We need to talk." "I'm here. Same as always." "My office. Now." I hung up, gathered my things, and walked down the hall with the quiet confidence of someone who finally understood that she held all the cards. It was time to see how far my brother was willing to go and how much of his true nature he was ready to reveal. Damien's office had always been a shrine to his own ambitions. Awards he'd won for visionary leadership lined the walls, along with photographs of him shaking hands with industry executives at conferences I'd never been invited to attend. His desk was glass and steel, positioned to catch the afternoon light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of downtown Millbrook. But when I walked in that Wednesday evening, something had changed. The confident posture was gone. The easy charm had been replaced by the kind of tension that comes from realizing you've miscalculated badly. "Close the door," he said, without looking up at his computer screen.
I closed it and took the chair across from his desk, the same chair where I'd sat through countless meetings where my ideas became his initiatives and my work became his achievements. But this time felt different. This time I wasn't there to be lectured or dismissed or quietly erased. "I don't understand what game you're playing," Damien said, finally meeting my eyes. "But I need it to stop today." "I'm not playing any games," I replied calmly. "I'm working. Same as always." "Don't." His voice cracked slightly. "Don't pretend this is normal. You were supposed to sign the agreement. You were supposed to take the money and move on. Instead, you're sitting here acting like nothing happened, and it's making everyone nervous." Everyone. The board, the investors. "Thomas thinks you might be planning some kind of legal challenge. And frankly, Zara, that would be incredibly stupid. You don't have the resources to fight this company. You don't have the connections or the experience or the—" "What?" I interrupted. "The power?" Something in my tone must have warned him before he stopped mid-sentence and really looked at me for the first time since I'd entered the room. Not the dismissive glance he usually gave me, but actual attention, as if he was seeing someone he didn't recognize. "What do you know?" he asked quietly. Before I could answer, his desk phone buzzed. He glanced at the caller ID, and his face went pale. "It's Ronald Blackstone from Meridian Capital." Meridian Capital was our largest potential investor, the venture capital firm that had been courting us for months with promises of a Series B funding round that would value the company at over $20 million. Ronald Blackstone was the senior partner who held the keys to that kingdom. "Answer it," I said. "Put it on speaker." Damien hesitated, then hit the button. "Ronald, good to hear from you. Zara's here too, my co-founder." "Good, I'm glad she's there. We need to discuss some complications that have emerged during our due diligence process." My heart started racing, but I kept my expression neutral. Due diligence, the deep dive investigation that serious investors conduct before writing large checks, the process that examines every aspect of a company's operations, finances, and legal structure.
"What kind of complications?" Damien asked, shooting me a look that was part confusion, part warning. "Well, it's interesting. Our legal team has been reviewing your corporate filings, and there seems to be some discrepancy in your shareholder documentation. According to the information you provided, you and your sister each hold 37% of the company, with the remainder held by various minor investors." "That's correct," Damien said quickly. "Actually, it's not." Ronald's tone was matter-of-fact, clinical. "According to the Secretary of State filings we pulled this morning, Ms. Hayes appears to control significantly more than 37% of the voting shares. In fact, our analysis suggests she holds majority control of the company." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the air conditioning humming in the walls. Damien's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and then a dawning horror as the implications became clear. "There must be some mistake," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I am afraid not. We've triple-checked the documentation. Margaret Chen's estate transferred her 26% stake directly to Ms. Hayes, along with proxy rights for an additional 25% held by your parents. That gives her 51% voting control, which makes her the de facto owner of Nexus Digital Solutions." I watched my brother's world collapse in real time. His hands gripped the edge of his desk so hard his knuckles went white. The carefully constructed narrative he'd built, where he was the visionary founder and I was the supportive sister who helped with operations, crumbled like a house of cards in a hurricane. "This creates a significant problem for our investment," Ronald continued, oblivious to the family drama playing out on his conference call.
We've been negotiating with someone who doesn't actually have the authority to make binding decisions about the company's future. Before we can proceed with any funding discussions, we need clear documentation of who has the legal right to represent Nexus Digital Solutions. I can explain, Damien started. Actually, I said, speaking for the first time since Ronald had called, I am the majority shareholder of this company, and any investment discussions should probably go through me. Another silence. Then Ronald's chuckle. Well, this is certainly an unexpected development. Miss Hayes, I don't believe we've spoken directly before, but I'd very much like to schedule a meeting with you at your earliest convenience. It seems we may have been talking to the wrong person. I'd be happy to meet, I said, pulling out my phone to check my calendar. How about Thursday afternoon? Perfect. I'll have my assistant send over the details. Damien, thank you for your time, but I think we'll be working primarily with Miss Hayes moving forward. The line went dead. Damien stared at the phone for a long moment, then slowly looked up at me. How long have you known? Known what? Don't play dumb, Zara. How long have you known about Margaret's will? How long have you been sitting on this information while I made plans and signed agreements and promised investors things I apparently can't deliver? I stood up, smoothing my skirt with deliberate calm. I've known for almost 2 years. The same 2 years you've spent systematically removing me from every decision, every recognition, every aspect of the company I built with my own hands. This is insane. You can't just take over everything because of some legal technicality. It's not a technicality, Damien. It's ownership. It's the difference between having power and pretending to have power. And you've been pretending for a very long time. He stood up too, his chair rolling backward into the window. The employees will never accept this. The clients don't know you. The board answers to shareholders, and I am the shareholder. I walked toward the door, then paused with my hand on the handle. There's going to be a company-wide meeting tomorrow morning at 9. I suggest you attend. You can't fire me. I'm the CEO. I built this company. I turned back to face him one last time. No, Damien, you built a story about this company. I built the actual company, and tomorrow everyone's going to find out the difference. As I walked out of his office and down the hallway toward the elevator, I could hear him behind me frantically dialing numbers, probably calling Thomas Brennan or Jennifer Walsh or anyone who might be able to explain how his perfectly orchestrated plan to erase me had just exploded in his face. But it was too late for damage control. The truth was out, and truth has a way of rearranging everything around it. By tomorrow morning, everyone in the building would know that the quiet woman they'd been overlooking was actually the person who owned their paychecks. And my brother, the golden child who had spent his entire life believing he was destined for greatness, was about to learn what it felt like to be powerless. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that makes everything feel possible. I walked into the Nexus Digital Solutions lobby at 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the company-wide meeting I'd called the night before. Chloe, our receptionist, looked up from her desk with undisguised curiosity. Morning, Zara. The conference room's all set up. Everyone's talking.
I could hear the buzz of conversation echoing from the main workspace. 28 employees trying to figure out why the woman they'd been trained to overlook had suddenly called an emergency meeting. I imagined the speculation, the nervous energy, the way people huddled together when they sensed that change is coming but don't know what form it will take. Thank you, Chloe, I said, adjusting the blazer I'd chosen carefully that morning. Not the gray one I'd worn for years like a uniform of invisibility, but a deep navy jacket that made me feel like someone who deserved to take up space. Is Damien here yet? He's been in his office since 7, she whispered, as if sharing a secret. He doesn't look good. I walked toward conference room A, the same space where Damien had tried to execute my professional death sentence just 4 days earlier. But this time, I'd arranged the seating differently. Instead of the tribunal setup he'd chosen, I'd requested a circular arrangement. Everyone equal, everyone able to see everyone else. The employees filed in gradually, carrying coffee cups and nervous expressions. I recognized every face, remembered hiring most of them, training them, solving problems with them during late-night crisis sessions. These were people I'd worked alongside for years, people who'd seen me as a helpful colleague, but never as a leader. Jennifer Walsh from HR arrived looking like she'd aged 5 years overnight. Thomas Brennan, the corporate lawyer, slipped in behind her with a briefcase and the shell-shocked expression of someone whose carefully crafted legal strategy had just been demolished by facts he hadn't bothered to check. Damien entered last, precisely at 9 o'clock. His usual confident stride had been replaced by something more cautious, more uncertain. He took a seat directly across from me, and for a moment I saw my little brother again, not the arrogant CEO who'd tried to erase me, but the scared kid who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. The feeling lasted exactly 2 seconds. "Thank you all for coming," I said, standing up so everyone could see me clearly. "I know this meeting was called on short notice, and I appreciate your flexibility. What I'm about to share will probably come as a surprise to most of you, but I want you to hear it directly from me, rather than through rumors or speculation." I looked around the room, making eye contact with as many people as possible. As of yesterday afternoon, following a due diligence review conducted by Meridian Capital, it's been confirmed that I am the majority shareholder of Nexus Digital Solutions, with 51% controlling interest in the company. The silence was absolute. I could see people processing this information, trying to reconcile the quiet operations manager they knew with the concept of corporate ownership. A few glances shot toward Damien, who was staring at the table like it might provide an escape route. This means that, effective immediately, there will be some changes in our leadership structure. I will be assuming the role of CEO with full operational and strategic authority. Damien will be transitioning out of his executive role, though the terms of that transition are still being finalized. "This is ridiculous," Damien said suddenly, his voice cutting across the room. "Zara, you can't just walk in here and upend everything because of some paperwork technicality. These people don't know you as a leader. You've never run a company." I felt 28 pairs of eyes watching to see how I'd respond to this challenge. The old Zara would have shrunk back, would have deferred to his louder voice and more confident manner. But the old Zara hadn't known she owned the company. "You're right that they don't know me as a CEO," I said calmly, "but they do know me as the person who built the technical systems that generate our revenue. They know me as someone who's been here for every crisis, every late-night emergency, every moment when things threaten to fall apart. They know me as someone who solves problems, rather than creating them." I turned to address the room. I'm not going to pretend this isn't a significant change. It is. But I want you to know that my priority is protecting the company we've all built together and ensuring that everyone who's contributed to our success is properly recognized and compensated for their work. Marcus Chen, one of our senior developers, raised his hand tentatively. "What does this mean for our jobs, for the projects we're working on?" "It means stability. It means no more expensive office moves that strain our budget. No more consulting fees for logo redesigns that nobody requested. No more hiring decisions based on who can make the CEO laugh rather than who can do the work." A few people smiled at that. Jennifer Walsh looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. "It also means some changes in how credit is assigned for our achievements. I've been tracking our project outcomes for years, and I think you'll find that many of our most successful initiatives came from this room, from your expertise and creativity, not from executive presentations at industry conferences." Now I had their attention. I could see people sitting up straighter, leaning forward.
I'm scheduling individual meetings with each of you over the next 2 weeks to discuss your roles, your compensation, and your ideas for the company's future. This isn't about punishment or revenge. It's about building something sustainable and fair where good work gets recognized, regardless of who takes credit for it.
Thomas Brennan cleared his throat. Ms. Hayes, there are legal procedures that need to be followed for this kind of transition. Board notifications, shareholder documentation, all of which have been properly filed, I interrupted, pulling a folder from my briefcase. Patricia Hendricks from Hendricks Walsh & Associates has ensured that every requirement has been met. The transition is legally sound and effective immediately. Damien stood up abruptly. Fine, you want the company? Take it, but don't expect me to sit here and pretend this hostile takeover is some kind of noble justice. You're destroying everything we built together. No, Damien, I said quietly. I'm saving it from someone who forgot that we means more than just him. He walked out without another word, leaving behind 28 employees who looked like they'd just witnessed a revolution. After the meeting ended and people began filing out, some stopping to congratulate me, others looking shock-shelled, I remained in the conference room, staring at the empty chair where my brother had sat. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Patricia. How did it go? I typed back, "It's done. The company is secure, the employees are protected, and justice has been served." But as I sat there in the aftermath of the most important victory of my life, I realized that winning and healing aren't the same thing. I'd saved the company and protected my future, but I'd also lost my brother, maybe permanently. The cost of justice, I was learning, isn't always paid by the people who deserve it. Still, as I looked around the conference room where I'd been sentenced to professional death just 4 days earlier, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: pride. Not pride in someone else's recognition of my work, but pride in recognizing my own worth and fighting for it when nobody else would. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. Sometimes it's becoming who you were always meant to be, even when the people closest to you can't see it. And sometimes, when you're standing in a supply closet holding an empty printer cartridge while your brother screams at you like a stranger, you're actually holding the key to everything you've ever deserved. You just don't know it yet. But now you do. And that changes everything. What would you have done in my situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever discovered that you had more power than you realized? Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and standing up for yourself? If this story resonated with you, I'd love for you to hit that like button and share it with someone who might need to remember their own worth. Subscribe for more stories about finding your power, fighting for what you deserve, and discovering that sometimes the quiet ones are the ones who hold all the cards. Remember, you're stronger than you think, more valuable than they tell you, and sometimes the best thing you can do for everyone is refuse to stay invisible. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.